When an anxious person dates an avoidant, it's usually a recipe for chaos. Constant conflict, unmet needs, and hot and cold behavior are just some of the issues that are going to dominate the relationship. And if these aren't really dealt with, then pretty soon the relationship is going to blow up one way or another. Now, if you're dealing with an avoidant who keeps pulling away from you and ending the relationship, well, there is actually hope. I'm going to tell you how to address these issues without creating more conflict and stop the cycle so that the two of you can get back together for good. I, of course, am Brad Browning, author of the X Factor 2.0 and a breakup coach here on YouTube for over 15 years. I've helped so many people win back their exes and create relationships that actually work and last. And I can help you too. All you have to do is subscribe. Now let's talk a little bit about the situation. So presumably you are anxious and your partner is an avoidant. They always kept you at a distance, and so you felt like you had to beg them to show you love and affection. Now this dynamic probably wasn't satisfying for either of you. They felt smothered and you probably felt neglected. And eventually it led to a breakup, maybe even several breakups. So first off, you really need to know that this is a very, very common situation, and it happens in a lot of relationships. And it is actually fixable, even if the two of you aren't talking right now. Because the thing that's drawing the two of you together is just as powerful as what's pushing you apart. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to assume that the two of you are currently in the off part of your on and off relationship. But frankly, this advice will be useful even if they're just pulling away from you and you don't know how to get through to them. There's often a tendency in relationships to fall into patterns. And these patterns can be tough to break. So let's talk about yours. Do you ever feel like you're too much for your partner? Do you ever get accused of pushing them to move too fast, too quickly? Do you always want more love, more affection, more attention? Do you feel like you're constantly trying to get a measure of your partner's moods and emotions? Are you constantly worried that they're going to end the relationship and leave you all alone? Well, these are all the hallmarks of anxious attachment. And these anxieties can make it difficult to actually connect with someone you love. But it's really not all bad, because people with anxious attachment have really huge hearts. They tend to be very loving and they're very attentive to their partner's moods and needs. But because this is their baseline, they tend to judge others based on their own example. Meaning that if their partner fails to live up to their same level of affection and attention that they're offering, then they think that something is wrong and that the other person is pulling away. And when they feel like this, they reach for the tools of the anxious person. They worry about the problem nonstop. They demand more love in order to try to prove that their partner cares for them. Essentially, they become very, very clingy. And on the exact opposite end of the spectrum is the avoidant partner. Now, they feel overwhelmed by what most people would consider reasonable expectations in a relationship. They feel smothered by the other person's love. They feel as though they're being pressured to act in ways that make them uncomfortable. For the avoidant person, the danger in a relationship isn't being ignored and taken for granted. It's feeling consumed by the relationship and losing their identity as an individual. Now, they feel this way really because they lack some of the emotional skills that many of us just take for granted. They struggle to communicate their needs and their boundaries, and they find conflict to be really overwhelming. So to avoid feeling discomfort, they try to keep a distance from their partners. And when issues actually do crop up, they take even more distance, trying to handle the problem as an individual rather than take the risks they associate with a face-to-face conflict. So you can probably see the issue here, right? Where the anxious person clings, the avoidant pulls away. And where the anxious person demands more closeness, the avoidant always wants more freedom. And these two cycles feed off one another. The avoidant keeps their distance, so the anxious person gets scared, and so they reach for more closeness, and they ask more questions. And that triggers the avoidant, and then they pull away. And then this feels like a rejection, which triggers the anxious person, and on and on and on. And eventually you have a relationship where one person is barely present, and the other is extremely demanding and suspicious of their partner's every move. Now, this seems like an insurmountable obstacle, but many people are able to overcome it and live happy lives in an anxious-avoidant partnership. So how does this happen? The thing about anxious-avoidant relationships is that they're really common. More common than you'd think, really, knowing that the two groups represent really small minorities in terms of their attachment style. So what is it that keeps bringing these seemingly incompatible groups together? Well, here's the thing, right? They're actually not as incompatible as they might seem. Because anxious and avoidant people actually have a lot of complementary traits that can be huge benefits in their relationships. Anxious people are very emotionally intelligent and aware. They're very loving and affectionate, and they bring out the best in their partners because they genuinely pay attention to them. And for the avoidant, this is huge. Because, the avoidant often feels unloved. They push people away, and then they feel all alone. But having someone there who loves them despite their faults, while intimidating at times, is also hugely validating. It tells them, I'm worthy of love. And because the anxious person is more emotionally intelligent, they can navigate conflict in ways that will help to soothe the avoidance fears. And the avoidant actually has something to offer the anxious person too, and that is stability. Now, while the romantic connection may have its problems, avoidants tend to have a steadiness that's inspiring to the anxious person. They seem unflappable, like nothing bothers them. So the anxious person learns that their intensity isn't going to destabilize their partner. And because they emphasize independence, they're reliable in ways that can really calm the anxious person's nerves. They may not be as present as they would like, but they'll be there when they're needed. And on top of that, the avoidant-anxious connection, even when it's functioning perfectly, is going to require a little independence and distance, which prevents problems like codependence and repetitive conflict. And that's why when they are working, avoidant-anxious relationships can be actually incredibly rewarding. I've seen relationships between anxious and avoidant people that really do work like magic. The two people support and love one another, they give each other space when it's appropriate, and love and attention when it's needed, and really neither feels taken for granted or smothered. But how do you get there? How do you make it work? Well, let's start where you are right now. So presumably the reason you're watching this video is because the two of you are really disconnected right now. But even though it may look like it's over, there is almost always still hope for the future of your relationship. And that is good because avoidance and anxious people do get back together more often than other groups. And the reason for that is these breakups happen because of the dynamic that we talked about earlier. You want love, they need space. You feel neglected, they feel overwhelmed. Now, I'm sure that's probably not exactly how it went down, but that was the underlying issue, right? It interfered with your connection, your trust, which made the relationship fragile. So when another issue came up, the two of you weren't able to work through it because your connection was so damaged. You no longer felt like you could trust them. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. So where does that leave you? How can you actually reconnect with your avoidant ex? How can you get back together knowing that this dynamic is likely to break you up again? And how can you show them that things will be different, and more importantly, how you can change things so that they actually are different? More supportive, more equal, and less conflicted. Well, the first step is awareness of the issues at play. So just by watching this video, you've already started to understand what's driving the cycle that's leading to these issues. So you know that your relationship blew up because you were too demanding and they were too distant. And you know that clinging to them and demanding love is not going to work. So what does work? Well, number one, you need to match their energy. See, after the breakup, your ex they're probably going to avoid you. And in fact, chances are that this is the main reason that they wanted to break up in the first place. They're scared of this closeness. They wanted space. They wanted freedom from the emotional demands that were being made of them. They wanted time to think. So you really need to give them that space. Allow them to have the space that they think they need anyways. Let them process the breakup and sit in silence for as long as it takes. Because here's the thing, avoidants often think that what they want, that what they need is solitude. Other people ask too much of them and overwhelm their sense of freedom. But when they have that freedom, they realize that it's not what they really want. Because if they truly wanted to be alone, they wouldn't be having this problem in the first place. Being alone is pretty achievable. Creating a relationship with someone you care about is hard, as you can probably attest. But they're out here making the attempt over and over again. Would they be doing that if they truly wanted to be alone? Probably not. What they really want is a relationship, but one that doesn't make them feel smothered. And if you're able to give them space after the breakup, stop texting them, stop calling them, asking what's wrong, begging for another chance, then you're going to stop threatening their individuality and you're going to start looking like the missing piece that they need to finally be happy. It also goes beyond that, because when the two of you inevitably reconnect, you have to do your best to maintain this distance, at least for a while. You need to keep matching their energy. Now, I know this can feel really hard, especially for an anxious person, because, aren't you just accepting a relationship that you don't want? One where they get all the space that they want and you get none of the closeness? Well, not really actually, because when you match an avoidance energy, they end up coming to you and you get closer than you probably could have imagined without them feeling the need to pull away. But that only happens if you follow my advice, including the second thing, which is to make it feel like their idea. See, the thing about avoidance is that they often feel out of control in their own relationships. They feel like you have all the power. And that's because they spend all their time trying to defend their sense of individuality from the threats of the relationship. It feels like you're always pushing them for more, and they really only have two options: deny you and feel like a bad partner, or give in and resent you for asking for more than they're comfortable with. So the avoidant is really stuck in a very reactive place, where to them, you seem proactive. You're calling the shots in a way. Now, I'm sure it doesn't feel that way to you. I mean, you're reacting to them just as much as they are to you. You're sensing that distance and trying to fill it up. But from their point of view, you're making moves and they're just trying to stand still, to maintain equilibrium. So you need to reverse that dynamic. You need to show them that they're in control. And that happens when you give them space and you let them come to you. It happens when you defer to their ideas and plans rather than feeling the need to always take control. And it happens when you just stop pushing them. So in essence, you just sort of need to learn how to be a little passive sometimes. Now this might sound bad, but I'm not asking you to give up your agency at all. It's really more about your perspective. Because to be honest, the thing about anxious people is that they tend to be control freaks. No offense. They tend to think that if they can make everything perfect around them, they can avoid feeling discomfort and that will fix the anxiety. But as you probably have experienced, that just creates a situation where you feel like you're carrying the world on your shoulders. So taking a back seat can sometimes really actually help you and your partner feel more grounded. If you're able to quiet that part of your mind that says, this isn't going exactly how I want, so something must be wrong. And you do need to focus on this, especially when you're trying to win back your ex. Give them a chance to come to you. Let them direct the flow of conversation. And above all, give them the chance to move things forward at their own pace. So don't be the one to push for a phone call, an in-person meetup, physical intimacy, really any of it. When they feel like they're able to take control, they're going to feel better about reconnecting. And that brings us to number 3, which is to be a safe place. So while we use the labels anxious and avoidant, the truth is that an avoidant feels a lot of anxiety too. They're just a lot better at hiding it. And for them, you've become one of the sources of that anxiety. And that's why they chose to break up. They felt like spending time with you, while enjoyable, was creating a lot of stress for them because you made demands on them emotionally. And that's why, at least early on in the reattraction process, you need to stop making these kinds of demands on them. So don't beg for their attention. Don't start with the good night or good morning texts. Take that pressure off. But beyond that, you want to show them that you can support them emotionally and you won't judge them. So be someone that they can come to with their concerns. It can be hard getting them to open up, so never judge or ridicule them. Instead, lead by example by sharing your thoughts and feelings in a really calm and measured manner. Now that's going to be a bit of a process, but if you can do it in a gentle way, you are going to be surprised by how quickly they open up. And number 4 is to get inside their head. So all of my advice to this point will give you an opportunity to get inside your ex's head and really understand them more thoroughly. But there are, of course, limits, especially when the two of you are apart. And of course, you don't want to pry or you're going to risk scaring them off. So a good solution is just to take my free quiz at breakupbrad.com/quiz. It's designed to give you a better sense of what your ex is actually thinking right now. The quiz is completely free. It just takes a couple of minutes and it will help you understand your chances of actually rebuilding this connection. Again, if you want to try it out, just go to breakupbrad.com/quiz. And moving on to number 5, which is become emotionally independent. Now, one of an avoidant's primary concerns is that you'll rely on them too much for emotional support and validation. And honestly, in many cases, this fear is justified. Anxious people tend to need a lot of support, more than avoidant can give them without feeling overwhelmed. So your best way to combat this is to develop your own sense of emotional resilience so that you can survive independently from your ex. And there's no better time for this than the breakup. You have an opportunity to not only survive, but improve yourself all on your own. And if you can do that, then you'll feel more confident weathering the storm, even if your ex isn't always there to hold you up. But of course, that isn't always going to be an easy process. You need to build resiliency through focus and attention. So first up, stop wallowing in your sadness and avoiding your problems. What I mean is, excessive moping, crying, and despair can actually be a distraction from dealing with the reality of the situation. If you lie in bed all day focusing on how sad you are without them, you're not actually engaging with the process of feeling better. Of course, the first few days are bound to be pretty depressing, but after that, you need to get up, dust yourself off, and start to look at the breakup in a more honest way. All right, that just about does it for this video. I hope that you can find peace with your ex again now that you know how to break this anxious avoidance cycle. And things probably are going to work out and you will feel good again given time. Until then, I'm right here to offer you advice and support, so please like this video, subscribe, say hi in the comments. I read as many of them as I possibly can. And if you do need some one-on-one support, please go to breakupbrad.com/coaching to see my current availability. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. See you next time.